I stood outside my own bedroom door, suitcase in hand, when Lisa snapped, "The garage has a cot. You'll be fine there." My son, David, didn't even look at me, just rubbed his temple like I was the problem. That room held 40 years of memories with my late wife. Now, it was Lisa's craft studio. They'd taken over the house I built, and that night, as I lay next to lawnmowers and oil cans, I made a choice. If they wanted me in the garage, fine. But they were going to lose a whole lot more. You don't build a house just with bricks and lumber. You build it with every promise you keep, every long day you come home with aching knees and still find the strength to tuck in your boy, and every soft word whispered to your wife when the world gets too loud. That house, my house, stood on more than just a foundation. It stood on my life. Marjorie and I moved in when I was 33. Fresh out of the service, full of calluses and big ideas, I poured every ounce of me into building that home. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I worked construction back then, hard, honest work. Marjorie worked part-time at the library, always smelling like old paper and lavender. She had a voice like warm tea and hands that could soothe a storm. Every Friday night, we sat on the porch swing with sweet tea and talked about the future, about raising a family, planting tulips, and painting the kitchen yellow. When David came along, the house felt complete. I remember pacing the hospital waiting room, hands shaking, heart hammering. Then they placed him in my arms, so small, so loud, and everything in me shifted. From that moment, I lived for him. We raised him right. At least, we thought we did. Mornings were pancakes, cartoons, and shoelaces that never stayed tied. Afternoons were homework on the dining table and scraped knees from backyard adventures. I taught David how to hammer a nail, fix a leaky faucet, and change a flat tire. I taught him how to respect people, to speak honestly, and to never, ever talk back to his mother. He was a good kid. Smart, curious, quiet like me but with Marjorie's fire tucked behind his eyes. We weren't rich, but the house always had food, warmth, and laughter. Christmases were magical. Marjorie made cinnamon rolls from scratch, and David used to leave out a glass of milk for Santa, even after he stopped believing. He'd give us homemade cards with glitter and crooked handwriting, and Marjorie would pretend not to cry every time. When David graduated college, the first in our family to do so, I felt something in my chest swell. We'd sold one of the trucks to help with tuition. Didn't matter. He walked that stage in a cap too big for his head, and I thought, we did it, Marjorie. We gave him a future. I paid off the house around the same time David got married. I remember shaking Lisa's hand the first time. She had a firm grip and sharp eyes, the kind that looked through you instead of at you. Still, I smiled. Told Marjorie, maybe she just needs time to warm up. We hosted their wedding reception in the backyard. Strung fairy lights through the oaks, rented tables from the VFW. Marjorie danced in her bare feet while David spun Lisa in circles. It was a good day. I grilled steaks, handed out beers, and gave a toast about love being work, not luck. People clapped. Lisa barely smiled. Then, 2 years later, Marjorie got sick. Lung cancer. Out of nowhere. No smoke, no signs. Just a cruel twist of nature. She lasted 11 months. I held her hand through every scan, every chemo appointment, every night she woke up coughing blood. And when she took her last breath, it was in our bed, her fingers tangled in mine, her final words barely audible, "Keep the house safe." I've never forgotten that. After we buried her under the dogwood tree out back, I spent most of my days tending to the garden, fixing odd things around the house just to stay busy. It felt too quiet. David visited less often, said Lisa's job was demanding, and the kids kept them running around. I understood. Or tried to. Still, every inch of that house echoed with her. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. Her slippers stayed by the bed for almost a year before I could put them away. I talked to her out loud sometimes. Maybe that's what grief does, it makes silence louder than words. Even in my loneliest moments, I found comfort in that house. I kept it spotless, like she used to. I still made pancakes on Saturdays, even if I was the only one eating them. And every spring, like clockwork, I planted her tulips, yellow and white, just like she liked them. I never imagined I'd be planting them alone. A few years passed, and then David lost his job. Called one night, voice tight. Said Lisa was pregnant again and they couldn't afford rent. Asked if they could stay, just a while. I didn't hesitate. Of course they could. This was his home too. The house had space. I'd moved most of my things into the downstairs den anyway. Told them I'd be glad for the noise again. At first, it felt good. The sound of kids running, Lisa cooking in the kitchen, David helping in the yard, it gave the place life again. I thought, maybe this is how I spend my old years, surrounded by family. I didn't see the signs then. Didn't want to. A snide comment here. A locked door there. But at the time, I chalked it up to stress. Figured they just needed time to settle in. I thought I'd be sharing my home. Turns out, I was surrendering it. It started with little things. You'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. I wasn't. Not then. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was over a lamp. Marjorie's old reading lamp, green glass shade, brass base, sat on the side table by my recliner for over 30 years. I came home from a walk and found it boxed up in the garage. Replaced by a new one, sleek, modern, cold. Lisa said, it clashed with the new aesthetic. No apology. No asking. Just gone. I said nothing. Just nodded and carried the box to the corner of the garage. That corner started filling up with pieces of my life soon after. Then came the rug. The portrait. The clock that ticked too loud, apparently. Lisa wanted to refresh the space. David didn't even meet my eyes when I brought it up at dinner. He just shrugged and mumbled, "It's still your house, Dad." But it didn't feel like it. They had been in the house 3 months when I realized I was knocking before entering my own kitchen. Lisa had started keeping the pantry door organized in a way I didn't understand, everything labeled, color-coded. Once, I moved a can of soup and she sighed so loudly it felt like a slap. I brushed it off. Told myself, they're under stress. Be patient. But it kept piling up. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs wearing my robe, had been mine for 20 years. Lisa looked up from her coffee and said, "Would you mind getting dressed before the kids come down? It's a bit much." A bit much. I laughed it off, but it stung. I found myself creeping around the house quieter, like I was a guest. I started waiting until after they left for work to use the kitchen. Ate dinner later, alone, to give them space. I told myself it was temporary. That they'd find a place soon, and things would go back to normal. But then David stopped calling me Dad in front of the kids. Started saying Grandpa like it was a formality, not affection. The grandkids, Sam and Ellie, used to hug me every morning. Now, they barely said hi. One time, I offered to pick Sam up from soccer practice, and Lisa said sharply, "That's okay. We've got it." I wasn't trying to interfere. I was trying to help. But suddenly, everything I did seemed to inconvenience them. The biggest shift came when the spare keys went missing. I kept a copy in the drawer by the phone, had since Marjorie and I first moved in. One day, it was gone. When I asked, Lisa said, "We're just trying to keep things secure. Kids, you know." That drawer was my drawer. Had been for 40 years. I started locking my bedroom door at night. David noticed. He gave me a strange look one evening and said, "Is everything okay, Dad?" I wanted to answer honestly. Tell him no, it wasn't. That I felt like a ghost in my own home. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not yet. I just forced a smile and said, "Just a habit." He nodded, distracted, and went back to his phone. The power dynamic had shifted, and I didn't realize it until it was already solid. I was no longer the head of the house. I wasn't even a member of it. I was a placeholder. I overheard them one night, through the vent above my room. Lisa was whispering, frustrated. "He leaves his stuff everywhere. The den smells like liniment. We need to figure something out, David." "He's your father-in-law," David replied flatly. "He's not my father," she snapped. "We can't keep living like this." I laid there, staring at the ceiling, every word branding itself into my chest. That week, I noticed they stopped asking if I wanted anything from the grocery store. I stopped getting invited to sit with them during movie nights. Sam asked me why my room was so messy once, and I realized Lisa had been in there, tidying without asking. Folding my shirts. Moving things. Invading. But I said nothing. I kept telling myself, be grateful. They're family. They just need time. Then came the moment that changed something in me. I was in the garage fixing the mower, something to keep my hands busy, when Lisa came in, looked at me, and said, "You really should think about simplifying your space down here. The garage is getting cluttered." Your space. Not the garage. Not the house. Not ours. Your space. It hit me like a cold wind through a cracked window. That's how they saw it now. Not my home. Just the place I was allowed to exist. Something cracked that day, not loudly, not all at once, but like the first hairline fracture in glass. After she left, I stood there in silence, oil on my hands, looking around at the boxes. Marjorie's lamp. My tools. Old pictures. Bits of a life carefully stored, quietly erased. And I thought, they don't see me as part of this anymore. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being phased out. I didn't expect to be invited to every dinner. I didn't expect warm hugs or laughter every day. But I never imagined I'd be treated like a burden, especially not in my own home. The final straw wasn't loud. It wasn't even said to me directly. It came during a Sunday dinner that I wasn't even supposed to attend. Lisa's parents were visiting, and I'd heard them arrive through the window, loud voices, fake laughs, car doors slamming. I'd stayed in my room out of habit, but the smell of roast chicken drifting through the hallway tugged at me. I hadn't eaten all day. My stomach ached with the kind of hollowness that wasn't just hunger. I stepped into the dining room quietly, thinking maybe I could just grab a plate and head back to the den. But the moment I appeared, everything shifted. Lisa stopped mid-sentence. Her parents froze, their smiles flickering. David's face tightened, not with anger, but with something worse. Embarrassment. Lisa stood up slowly and said, with a polite but cold tone, "Oh. We weren't expecting you." I looked at the table. 8 place settings. None for me. "I'll just fix myself a plate," I said quietly. Lisa stepped in front of the serving dishes. "Actually, I thought we agreed you'd eat in the den during our private dinners." Agreed? I never agreed to that. No one ever asked me. David looked down at his plate. Didn't say a word. I nodded once, turned around, and walked out. But I didn't go to the den. I went out the back door, down to Marjorie's garden. I sat by the tulips, the ones I planted every spring in her memory, and tried not to cry. Later that evening, I returned to the dining room to clean up. Everyone had gone to bed. I'd done this before, picking up plates, wiping counters, taking the trash out. It gave me a sense of control, of usefulness. That's when I saw it. Lisa's parents had brought a housewarming gift. A small, glossy frame sat on the sideboard with gold lettering across the front, Home Sweet Home, EST 2022. The year they moved in. Not 1983, when Marjorie and I signed the papers. Not 1985, when David took his first steps across that very floor. Number 2022. I picked it up and turned it over. A card was taped to the back, written in Lisa's familiar script. Congratulations on your new beginning. You've made this house truly your own. I stood there for a long time. Frame in one hand, silence pressing in on all sides. Truly your own. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house like a ghost, touching the walls, the banister, the windows I'd caulked by hand. Everything felt borrowed now. Like I was trespassing. I stopped outside my old bedroom, Marjorie's room. The door was closed, and the soft glow of a lamp leaked from underneath. I knocked gently. No answer. I turned the knob. Locked. I heard Lisa's voice from inside. David, just let it go. And his reply, he won't make it much longer. It's just a matter of time. I froze. Lisa said, quieter now, then we'll finally have peace. Real peace. There was a long pause. Then David whispered, yeah. I backed away from the door, heart pounding so loud it hurt. The next morning, I found my framed wedding photo with Marjorie sitting in a cardboard box in the garage. No note. No reason. Just packed away like clutter. It broke something in me. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I sat on the floor of the garage and stared at that photo. Her smile looked back at me, steady as ever, like she knew what was coming. I brushed a bit of dust off the glass and whispered, I'm sorry. But then I heard her voice in my memory, gentle but firm. Don't let anyone dishonor this house. I stared at the tools on the wall. The boxes. The years. And I realized something. They didn't just want the house. They wanted me gone. Not just physically. Emotionally. Erased. I wasn't even sure David realized what he was doing. Maybe Lisa had taken the reins long ago, and he was just following the path of least resistance. But it didn't matter. Whether passive or active, betrayal is betrayal. They had the keys, the kitchen, the bedrooms. But I still held the deed. I stood up, knees aching, and pulled open the drawer under my workbench. Inside was the old file folder, yellowed, frayed, where I kept the original house documents. The mortgage release. The ownership paperwork. Everything. Still in my name. My name alone. I ran my fingers over the embossed notary stamp on the final page. The house was paid off 20 years ago. Untouched since. No refinancing. No loans. Nothing. Just mine. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. If they didn't want me in the house, then maybe they didn't deserve it at all. Some betrayals are loud. This one came quietly, in whispers and shadows. And it didn't feel like a knife to the back, it felt like slowly sinking into cold water while everyone you love just watches. It happened on a Wednesday. I was in the hallway, walking slowly toward the garage after putting some old photo albums away, when I heard Lisa talking on the phone. She was in the living room, just around the corner, and didn't realize I was there. No, we can't list it until it's in David's name. I told you, he's dragging his feet with the paperwork, but once we get the doctor's statement, it'll be easier. She paused. Because if he's declared mentally unfit, the house passes to the next of kin. Yes. I've looked it up. Trust me, we're close. I stopped breathing. I stepped backward, slowly, until my heel bumped the doorframe of the hallway closet. Quiet as I could, I eased the door open and slipped inside. It was cramped, dusty, but I pressed my ear against the frame and kept listening. Lisa continued. He forgets stuff all the time now. Just yesterday he asked me where the salt was, and it was right in front of him. The signs are there. And honestly, it's not just that. The garage smells, like medicine and oil and oldness. It's depressing. The voice on the other end must have asked a question, because she sighed. No, he doesn't have a will. That's the good part. Once the house is in David's name, we're free and clear. A quick flip. The market's hot right now. I didn't hear anything else. My legs gave out beneath me, and I sat there in the dark with my heart beating so hard it hurt. I stared at the floorboards, the worn grooves of the wood, and tried to remember the last time I felt safe in that house. The last time it felt like mine. Marjorie's voice echoed in my head again. Promise me, if anything happens to me, you'll keep the house safe. I had broken that promise. I let them in. I opened the door. And now they were trying to take everything. I sat in that closet for what must have been an hour, maybe longer. The air felt thick. My body felt heavier than it ever had. When I finally stood up, I didn't go to my room. I went to the garage. I pulled out Marjorie's old shoebox from the highest shelf. Inside was a bundle of letters, her pearls, and the emergency key to the fireproof file box where I kept the deed, the marriage license, and a few bonds. I opened it. Everything was still there. My hands trembled as I laid each document out on the workbench. I reread the deed 3 times. My name was still the only one on it. Not David's. Not Lisa's. Mine. I let out a long, shaky breath. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was weak. Forgetful. Finished. But I remembered everything. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made my skin crawl, the fridge hum, the creak of the floorboards, even the clock ticking in the hallway. I kept thinking about Lisa's voice, the way she said, depressing, like I was some kind of mold creeping into her life. I wasn't a man to them anymore. I was just an obstacle. I woke before dawn and made coffee. Sat in the garage with Marjorie's photo beside me, watching the steam rise into the cold morning air. By 7, I had made a decision. I'd play along. I'd smile. I'd forget where the salt is. I'd pretend I didn't overhear anything. I'd let them dig their hole. But I would not be buried in it. That week, I started keeping a small notebook. I logged conversations. Dates. The names of Lisa's real estate friends. I even wrote down every time she adjusted my medication cabinet. I called Mr. Lentz, my old lawyer, the same man who handled Marjorie's will. Told him I needed a meeting, and that it had to be private. He didn't ask questions. Just said, come by Thursday morning. The day before the appointment, Lisa brought home moving boxes. She said they were for decluttering. Asked David to gently suggest that I start going through my things. Just in case we need to make space. David approached me that night, soft-spoken, fake sweet. Dad, maybe it's time to think about what you really need in here. Just to, make things easier. Easier for who? I nodded slowly. You're right. I should start getting things in order. He smiled, relieved. I smiled too, but for a different reason. That night, I sat in the garage with the notebook open in front of me and added the final line of the day. They think I'm confused. They think I'll just fade out. But I've never seen more clearly. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. By the time Thursday came, I had memorized every crack in that garage floor. Every oil stain, every shadow. I'd made peace with what I had to do. And strangely, that gave me clarity. I didn't feel bitter anymore. I felt sharp. I arrived at Mr. Lentz's office 15 minutes early, wearing my old brown blazer, the one Marjorie always said made me look like I knew something important. Maybe I finally did. "Henry," Lentz greeted, offering his hand, "it's been too long." We sat in his office, sunlight pouring through the window, bouncing off the dust in the air like slow sparks. I laid everything out, what I overheard, the boxes, the real estate whispers, the veiled comments about my memory. His brow furrowed as I talked. He didn't interrupt, just took notes with his old silver pen. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment. "You understand what you're asking, right?" "I do. You're removing your son from the inheritance. Your only child." I nodded. He made his choice. This house was my life's work. I buried my wife under the dogwood tree in that backyard. And now he lets his wife talk about me like I'm expired milk. Lentz leaned back in his chair. "All right. Then we'll make this official. You're of sound mind, and I'll have 2 witnesses on paper." He pulled out a fresh folder. "Let's update your will. And the deed." That afternoon, I signed the new documents with a hand that didn't tremble. David was removed entirely. A clause was added: if anyone contested the will, the house and all assets would go to the local veterans shelter. Not a penny would pass to them. Lentz looked at me and said quietly, "This is wise, Henry. Not spiteful. It's protective." I drove home with the windows down, letting the cold wind bite at my cheeks. I needed to feel it. Needed to remember that I was still alive, still capable, still me. But that resolve was tested the very next day. Lisa forgot to refill my blood pressure medication. I'd asked her twice. Both times she brushed me off. "I'll get to it." "You're not the only person in this house," she snapped, then walked off with her phone glued to her ear. That night, I made the mistake of confronting David. Just him and me in the kitchen. The kids were upstairs, Lisa out shopping. "I need to talk to you," I said. He turned, stiff. "Okay." I overheard Lisa on the phone. "You're planning something behind my back." His face paled, then hardened. "You misunderstood." "Did I?" "Because I also saw the housewarming card from her parents. Home Sweet Home, EST 2022. That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding." He rubbed his eyes and exhaled. "Dad, it's complicated. Lisa just wants what's best." "What's best for who, David?" He said nothing. I stepped closer. "This is my house. I built it. I cared for it. I watched you take your first steps in that hallway." His voice raised, sharp now. "And now you can't even find the salt. You get confused, you wander around muttering to yourself." I blinked. "Is that what she told you?" He looked away. "We've talked about assisted living." A long silence filled the kitchen. "You've talked about putting me in a home?" "We're just worried. That's all." I let out a bitter laugh. "No, you're not. You're inconvenienced. There's a difference." His mouth opened, then shut. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe defend himself, maybe apologize, but the words wouldn't come. I turned and walked out. That night, I sat in the garage again, notebook on my lap, pen in hand. They're slipping. David's afraid. Lisa's overconfident. They think I'm alone. But they've forgotten who I was before this house. The next morning, Mrs. Landry from next door came by. She's been my neighbor for 26 years. She saw me pulling weeds by the dogwood. "You doing all right, Henry?" she asked gently. I forced a smile. "Just keeping busy." She nodded. "That girl of David's, she speaks to you funny." I don't like it. I said nothing. But her eyes lingered. She knew more than she was saying. Before she left, she touched my arm. If you ever need help, you let me know. You're not as invisible as they think. Her words stayed with me all day. Later, I went through the house when no one was home and gathered every photo Marjorie had hung, wedding photos, baby photos, family vacations. I carefully packed them in the fireproof box with the documents. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. The morning I signed my final will, the sky outside Mr. Lentz's office was gray, thick clouds hanging heavy, like they were waiting to burst. It matched the weight in my chest. We sat in the same room, but this time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I just opened the folder, read each line carefully, and when it came time to put pen to paper, I did it without flinching. My name. My house. My choice. Lentz slid the documents back into the envelope. It's done, Henry. And with the no contest clause, they won't risk challenging it. If they do, it all goes to the veterans' shelter. I nodded. That's how it should be. He studied me for a moment. How are you feeling? I sat back in the chair and looked out the window. I feel like I just buried something, I said. Not someone, something. The part of me that still hoped David might come around. That he'd stand up, push back against Lisa, and say, "This is my father. He deserves respect." But that man, the man I raised, he'd either changed too much, or stopped caring altogether. Still, the guilt tugged at me. On the drive home, I passed the high school David once attended. I slowed down near the football field. I remembered watching him run across that grass, too slow to make varsity but too determined to quit. Marjorie had screamed louder than any parent in the stands. I remembered how proud we were when he graduated. How I slipped a 20 into his hand after the ceremony with a wink and said, "Don't tell your mother." And now, here I was, cutting him out of everything. Back home, I sat in the den and opened the small box that held our wedding bands. Mine was still thick and shiny. Hers was thinner, worn at the edges, the gold almost faded from decades of dishes and gardening. I held her ring in my hand and whispered, "I did what you asked. I'm protecting it now." But protection didn't come without pain. That afternoon, I drafted a letter. I didn't plan on giving it to them right away, maybe never. But I needed it written. For myself. David. This house was never just wood and paint. It was built on sacrifice, on your mother skipping lunches to buy you school supplies, on me working Saturdays for extra hours, on the promises we made to each other when we brought you home from the hospital. I don't know what happened to you. I don't know when I became an inconvenience. But I remember who you were. And maybe that's what hurts the most. This isn't revenge. This is preservation. Of her memory. Of mine. I hope one day you understand. Dad. I folded the letter and slipped it into the fireproof box beside the documents. I didn't cry. Not that day. Instead, I began preparing. Quietly. Thoroughly. I took photos of every room. I catalogued the furniture that belonged to Marjorie's side of the family. I sorted papers, labeled files, made a spreadsheet of what would stay and what I'd donate. Each night, I made small moves, nothing big enough to attract attention. Just slow, methodical actions. The way you'd prepare a house for winter. The way you brace yourself before a storm. I began researching online about property transfer notifications. I checked on utility names, ensuring everything stayed under my account. I even spoke to a notary in town about verifying documents again, just to cover all angles. Lisa didn't notice. She was too busy trying to stage the living room. New pillows. New rugs. One day she told David, Once we repaint and get rid of that ugly wood paneling, it'll be perfect for open houses. Open houses. They still thought I'd go quietly. That I'd slip away, maybe to some facility, and leave them the keys. But every time I walked past the garden, I remembered Marjorie's words, keep the house safe. Not just the structure. The soul of it. One evening, I found myself standing outside the dogwood tree. The sun had set, but the sky still held a trace of pink and blue. Her headstone was small, modest. Just how she wanted it. I knelt beside it and whispered, it's done. I finally see them for who they are. And in the silence that followed, I swore I felt the air shift, just slightly. Like approval. The final thing I did that week was change the locks. Quietly. Efficiently. New keys. Just 2 copies. One in my drawer. One in the file box. If they noticed, they said nothing. And on the inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. It was a Saturday morning when they finally crossed the line. I had woken early, as usual. My back hurt from the stiff garage cot, but I managed to make coffee and take it outside to the porch. The air was cool, the kind that makes your joints ache and your memories rise. I sat in Marjorie's old wicker chair and listened to the birds. I let myself feel normal, just for a moment. When I walked back into the garage, something was different. The boxes. The boxes were gone. Not all of them, but the top 3, labeled photos, keepsakes, and Marjorie's things, had been removed. In their place, a stack of plastic bins filled with Christmas decorations now sat, perfectly aligned. I opened the nearest bin. Tinsel. Artificial pine. Lisa's handwriting on the lid, living room display. I found the missing boxes stacked in the far corner, next to the recycling bin. A few were bent, the corners damp from a slow leak in the ceiling. The box with Marjorie's name had collapsed on one side. Her wedding dress peeked through the tear in the cardboard, yellowed lace covered in dust. My hands shook as I lifted it. When I went into the house, Lisa was standing at the kitchen island, stirring oat milk into her coffee like she hadn't just desecrated my life's most sacred memories. Why did you move my things? I asked quietly. She looked up, not even startled. We needed space. The garage is overflowing. You moved Marjorie's wedding dress next to a leaky wall. She blinked, expression flat. It's just fabric, Henry. I took a step forward, voice low. That wasn't your decision to make. David walked in just then, holding Ellie on his hip. What's going on? Your wife moved my boxes, my wife's belongings, to make room for Christmas junk. Lisa scoffed. It's not junk. And I didn't think it would be a big deal. Honestly, Henry, you need to start letting go of some of that stuff. David shifted Ellie and said, maybe let's all take a breath. I turned to him. No, David. Not this time. This isn't about space. This is about disrespect. You don't see me as part of this house anymore. Lisa leaned on the counter. That's not true. We just need order. You live in the garage now, it's shared space. That was it. The final thread snapped. I don't live in the garage, I said, voice clear. I was banished to it. David's face fell. Come on, Dad. That's not fair. I looked at him, really looked. My son. The boy I taught how to ride a bike. The man who now stood beside the woman who spoke about me like I was rotting furniture. You told me to sleep in the garage, I said. And I did. You asked for space, and I gave it. You replaced my memories, mocked my habits, and now you're planning to sell this house behind my back. The silence that followed was thick. Lisa paled, just slightly. I nodded slowly. I know everything. The phone calls. The doctor's note plan. The staging. Lisa's mouth opened, but no sound came. David looked at the floor. "I'm not senile," I said. "I've never been sharper." I walked past them, down the hall, into my den. I opened the file box, pulled out the documents, copies of the deed, the new will, the letters. Everything. I placed them into my bag along with the small velvet box that held Marjorie's ring. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I walked into my bedroom. I stood there in the doorway, looking at the space Lisa had converted into a craft studio. She had taken down Marjorie's curtains, painted the walls some lifeless gray. But it was still ours. I walked to the closet, pulled the chain that turned on the light, and reached behind the old coats. The safe was still there, still tucked between the joists. I opened it. Inside were the originals, every legal paper that mattered. I packed them with care, closed the bag, and zipped it tight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the garage, lights off, listening to the sounds of the house. Laughter from the living room. A movie playing. Dishes clinking. None of it included me. At midnight, I got in the truck and drove 3 towns over. The realtor I'd spoken to earlier that week met me at the diner, just like we planned. She was quiet, professional, and didn't ask questions when I handed her the folder. "I want the listing signed and active by sunrise," I told her. "Private sale, no family notification." She nodded. "It'll be done. Fast cash offers only?" "Yes." I signed the listing agreement right there, under the flickering light of a roadside diner. By the time the sun rose, the house was no longer theirs, not even in theory. The invitation came on a Wednesday, Ellie's birthday party. Lisa printed the cards herself. Pink letters, unicorn stickers, glitter that rubbed off on your fingers. It said, "Hosted by David and Lisa at our home." I stared at that word for a long time. Our. Funny how much weight a 3-letter word can carry. They didn't ask if I wanted to help. Didn't even check if I'd be home. I suppose they assumed I'd either be out of the way or forgotten altogether. The party was set for Saturday afternoon. Balloons tied to the mailbox. Folding tables in the yard. Lisa wore a flowing sundress and fake joy. David grilled burgers, pretending nothing was fractured. Parents from Ellie's school buzzed around, sipping lemonade and complimenting the house. My house. I stayed in the garage that morning, watching the preparations through a crack in the blinds. I had everything ready, documents in a folder, copies printed and stapled, name highlighted in bold. I even wore Marjorie's favorite tie. Navy blue with tiny silver dots. At 3:15 p.m., with kids running around and music playing, I stepped out into the yard. It was like a needle dropped on a record. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few people smiled politely, unsure of who I was. Others looked at Lisa. She stiffened, eyebrows lifting in mock surprise. "Dad," David said awkwardly, approaching me, "why don't we talk inside?" "No," I said calmly, "we'll talk here." I walked up to the nearest table and placed the folder down. "Everyone, I just need a moment of your time. This won't take long." Lisa stepped forward. "Henry, this really isn't." "Quiet," I said, without raising my voice. The stillness in my tone made her stop. I opened the folder and held up the first document, the original deed, notarized and signed, with my name alone on the title. "This house," I said, "was purchased in 1983 by myself and my wife, Marjorie. It has remained in my name since. No transfer of ownership has taken place. No secondary names have been added. And as of 2 days ago, it is under contract to be sold." Gasps. Murmurs. David's jaw dropped. "You sold the house," he said, almost choking on the words. "Yes," I replied. To a buyer who won't replace tulips with gravel or throw wedding dresses next to lawn chemicals. Lisa stepped forward, voice trembling with fury. You can't do that. I turned to her. Legally, I can. And I did. I filed the paperwork. I signed the contract. Closing is in 10 days. David looked pale. But, where will we go? I nodded. You have 30 days to vacate. The new owner has been informed of the timeline. Lisa's parents looked horrified. A few guests began to excuse themselves. Why are you doing this? David asked, voice cracking. We're your family. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't strip you of dignity. Family doesn't lock doors or stage interventions for control. Family doesn't talk about you like a broken appliance waiting to be replaced. He looked down, ashamed. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't hear the phone calls, see the documents, smell the manipulation? I was old, not stupid. Lisa tried again. You're making a scene. No, I said. I'm making a statement. I handed the second copy of the deed to David. You can keep this. Frame it if you want. As a reminder. I turned to leave, but paused by the dogwood tree. I looked at the tulips blooming underneath. She asked me to protect the house, I said to no one in particular. And I did. With that, I walked back into the garage, closed the door, and sat down. For the first time in months, I felt something deeper than peace. Power. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The day after the party felt quieter than any day I could remember. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The heavy kind. Like a blanket soaked in rain, draped over your shoulders. The kind that makes the floorboard sound louder when you walk. The kind where the fridge's hum feels like shouting. No one spoke to me that morning. David didn't knock. Lisa didn't glare. The kids didn't come running to ask for juice or cartoons. It was as if the entire house had taken a collective breath and decided to hold it. They knew. It was real now. I sat at the kitchen table alone, stirring sugar into my coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. There was a plate of untouched toast in front of me, but my appetite had vanished. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was floating. Adrift in my own silence. That afternoon, David's car left the driveway. Lisa followed 20 minutes later with the kids. No goodbyes. No slamming doors. Just the silence stretching longer. I walked the perimeter of the house, tracing my steps like I used to do after storms when I checked for damage. This time I wasn't checking for broken shingles or clogged gutters. I was checking for something else, something harder to name. In the backyard, the dogwood tree stood tall, its petals beginning to fall in soft, white drifts. I knelt beside it, brushing the soil with my fingers. Almost done, Marjorie, I whispered. Almost. The neighbors must have heard by now. You can't hide an announcement like that, not in a town like ours. And sure enough, that evening, while I was pruning the hedges, Mrs. Landry appeared at the edge of her lawn. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there in her gardening gloves, twisting them in her hands. Finally, she said, "Heard there was quite the scene yesterday." I nodded. "Heard you took your house back." I did. She smiled, sad, but proud. "Good. You built it." They were only ever guests. We stood in companionable silence for a while. Then she turned to go but paused. "You're not alone, Henry. You've got more people in your corner than you think." The next few days were slow. The house remained tense, like it was holding its breath. Lisa avoided me completely. David moved through the hallways like a ghost, shoulders hunched, eyes low. On Thursday, a manila envelope arrived in the mail, an official copy of the sale agreement from the realtor. I read it once, signed it again, and placed it in the fireproof box beside Marjorie's letters. The closing date was set. 10 more days. Each evening, I took walks around the neighborhood like I used to. It helped clear the fog. Let me breathe. The people I passed nodded respectfully. A few offered words they didn't need to say. You did the right thing, Henry. Long overdue. I didn't argue. I just nodded. One afternoon, as I passed the small park 2 blocks down, I saw Sam, my grandson, sitting alone on the swings. No Lisa in sight. He looked up and saw me, hesitated, then waved shyly. I walked over. Hey, bud. Hi, Grandpa. We sat together in silence for a bit, just the creak of the swing chains between us. Mom's really mad, he said after a while. I figured. Are we really moving? I looked at him, those familiar eyes, David's eyes, once so full of wonder. Yes, I said softly. He kicked at the gravel beneath the swing. I don't want to go. I didn't know what to say to that. So I told him the truth. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love. And sometimes, we have to protect the things that matter, even if it means letting go. He nodded, slowly. After a moment, he said, I liked your room. The old one. With the big chair. I smiled. Me too. We sat a little longer before Lisa's car appeared at the far end of the lot. He stood up quickly. Don't tell her I talked to you, he said. I won't. He ran off. I watched him go, the weight in my chest pressing deeper. Back home, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. The walls Lisa painted gray. The couch she picked. The rugs that didn't match. None of it felt like Marjorie. But somehow, it didn't matter anymore. This house had roots, deeper than paint and pillows. And no matter what they'd done to try and erase her, they never could. Her touch was in the banister I carved. Her voice in the kitchen window she used to open every spring. Her laughter in the floorboards that creaked just right when you stepped in the wrong spot. They couldn't scrub her out. And soon, they wouldn't have the chance. The idea came to me in the middle of the night, one of those quiet moments when you can't sleep, and your thoughts start to wander down paths you never would have dared in the daylight. What if the house didn't belong to them, or even just to me? What if it could be more than a battleground for betrayal? What if it could be sanctuary? The next morning, I made a phone call. Then another. By noon, I was sitting across from a woman named Vanessa in the local community center. She wore a navy blazer and had kind eyes, the kind that don't flinch when you talk about painful things. I'm thinking of turning my home into a transitional space for elderly veterans, I said. She blinked, surprised. That's incredible. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. I'm a vet myself. Seen too many of us grow old and get forgotten. She nodded, and I saw something shift in her. Respect, maybe. Recognition. We talked for an hour. She explained zoning regulations, permit needs, liability protection. She handed me a folder full of forms, but more importantly, she gave me her card and said, "You won't be doing this alone." It was the first time in a long while someone said those words to me and meant them. That night, I walked through the house differently. I wasn't grieving it anymore, I was reimagining it. The living room? That could be a shared common space. The den could become a quiet reading room or even an office. The 3 guest rooms upstairs, once mine, David's, and the nursery, could house men who needed a soft bed and a locked door. Somewhere safe to catch their breath again. Marjorie would have loved it. I remembered her fussing over the kitchen counter while preparing meals for the church bake sale. She always had a soft spot for the lonely ones, as she called them. Everyone deserves somewhere to go where they're wanted, she'd say. Maybe this was the way to keep that alive. Over the next few days, I moved quickly. I had less than 2 weeks before closing, but that wasn't a problem. The buyer, a kind man named Hector, agreed to lease the house back to me for a year, on the condition that it would be used for non-profit or charitable work. Just promise me you'll fill it with purpose, he said. I will, I told him. With all my heart. I cleared out the garage first, finally free of Lisa's bins and clutter. I repainted the walls. Cleaned the floor. Donated the broken things and labeled the working tools neatly along the pegboard. It looked like it used to, mine again. Then I turned to the bedrooms. David's old room still had a patch of wallpaper with rocket ships on it. I smiled as I peeled it off, finger tracing the tape lines I'd added when he was 8. He used to pretend he was going to the moon. I guess in a way, he did. He drifted so far away I couldn't recognize him anymore. The guest room, once sterile and lifeless, became the first official space. I cleaned the windows, polished the furniture, and added fresh bedding. A neighbor donated a dresser. Another brought over a reading lamp. It came together faster than I thought possible. Word got around. People started offering things. Mr. Hill from the VFW brought over 2 extra bed frames. Mrs. Landry showed up with folded blankets and a tray of chicken pot pie. You're doing a good thing, she said, standing in the doorway. More than most would. I thanked her, but I couldn't take the credit. Not really. This house saved me first, I said. Now I'm just returning the favor. Midway through the week, I was sitting on the porch when a young woman walked up the steps. She had long brown hair, glasses, and nervous hands. Clutched a backpack against her chest. Hi, she said softly. Are you Mr. Harlow? I am. She smiled. My grandpa was in your unit. Korea. Said you once gave him your jacket during a snowstorm. Ray Collins? I asked, squinting. She nodded. Lord, I chuckled. He was half my size. That jacket swallowed him. She laughed, then looked serious again. He passed last year. But he talked about you all the time. I wanted to help. I'm a nurse. I have some time between jobs. I looked at her, overwhelmed by the timing. You're hired, I said without hesitation. We spent that evening drawing out a simple floor plan on the dining table. We talked about meal schedules, medications, how to handle emergencies. For the first time in months, the house buzzed with something real. Not forced politeness. Not tension. Hope. David noticed. He started staying out later. Coming home with excuses. One night, I heard him talking to Lisa through the walls. He's not angry anymore. That's worse. He's doing something. Lisa scoffed. What, playing landlord to old war stories? No, he said. He's turning it into something good. Her silence was the only answer. I didn't eavesdrop any further. I had work to do. By the end of the month, the house felt alive again, but in a different way. It didn't buzz with the sound of children's cartoons or Lisa's high heels clicking across the floor. It didn't smell like overpriced candles or feel like I was tiptoeing through someone else's space. It felt lived in. Shared. Steady. The first resident was named Earl. Earl was 78, wiry, and walked with a limp from a shrapnel injury he'd picked up near the end of his service. We met through the local VA. He had been staying in his car after losing his housing voucher, too proud to tell his daughter. When he moved into the middle bedroom, he shook my hand 3 times and didn't say much, just, thanks, brother. That was enough. The second was Martin. He was younger, mid-60s, and carried grief like an extra coat. Lost his wife to cancer the year before and didn't have kids. He brought one suitcase, 2 books, and a dog-eared photo of his wedding day. I gave him the room that used to be David's. Within the week, we'd fallen into a rhythm. Breakfast at 7. Shared chores. Card games in the evening. No one spoke unless they wanted to. No one was judged if they sat in silence. It felt right. One evening, I came downstairs and found Earl fixing the old ceiling fan in the dining room. "Didn't even ask you to," I said. He shrugged. "Didn't have to." Martin mowed the lawn twice before I even noticed he was doing it. The kitchen was full of stories now. Stories of war and mistakes and quiet bravery no one ever gave them medals for. Marjorie's table, the one Lisa once threatened to replace with a sleek design, was covered in mugs, pill organizers, and crossword puzzles. This was family. Not blood. Not legal ties. But mutual respect. Shared dignity. Lisa didn't understand it. She still walked around the house like it owed her something. Refused to speak to the men. Started keeping her distance even more once Vanessa and the community center came by to install a safety railing in the front hallway. I overheard her mutter to David, "It's like we're living in a halfway house." David didn't respond. Maybe because he didn't know what to say anymore. Or maybe because, somewhere deep down, he realized I'd found something here he never gave me: belonging. The grandkids stayed away for a while. Lisa probably told them not to bother me. But one afternoon, I was out back pruning the tulips when I heard a small voice behind me. "Grandpa?" I turned and saw Ellie, 7 years old, hair in pigtails, hugging a stuffed rabbit to her chest. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a picture. Crayon drawing. 3 stick figures, me, her, and a yellow flower between us. "It's us," she said. "In the garden." I crouched down, knees creaking, and took it gently. "It's beautiful," I told her. She looked around, cautious. "Mom said we can't come over anymore. But I miss you." I nodded slowly, eyes burning. "I miss you too, sweetheart." I folded the picture carefully and tucked it into my shirt pocket. That evening, I pinned it to the kitchen corkboard, right next to the calendar and Martin's grocery list. When Earl saw it, he tapped the drawing and said, "She's got your ears." I laughed louder than I had in weeks. A few days later, a small group of neighbors came over with supplies. Folded towels. Extra bedding. A kettle. One man brought a rocking chair his father had used before he passed. No one asked for recognition. They just came, nodded, and helped. One woman said, "You're building something good here, Henry." I paused, hand on the doorframe, and replied, "I'm just building what should have been here all along." I caught David watching from his car once, parked at the end of the street. He didn't get out. Just sat there, engine running, face unreadable. I didn't wave. Didn't need to. The house was fuller now than it had ever been, with people who saw each other. People who didn't need power or ownership or control. Just safety. Company. Respect. We weren't perfect. We all had our ghosts. Our scars. Our moments of silence at dinner when someone remembered something too heavy to say out loud. But we sat with each other through it. And that mattered more than anything. Late one night, I stood by the window, looking out at the moonlight across the backyard. The tulips shimmered softly. I could almost see Marjorie there, standing among them with her arms crossed, smirking at how I finally pulled the weeds from the back row. "I hope you're proud," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed she was. It had been weeks since anyone from David's family set foot on the porch. I thought maybe they'd written me off completely, and honestly, I was fine with that. The house had moved on. So had I. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to stretch long shadows across the floor, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find David standing there. No Lisa. No kids. Just him. His hands stuffed into the pockets of a worn hoodie, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight like he'd been chewing on regret all morning. We stared at each other for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. "Can I come in?" he finally asked. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around like it was the first time he was really seeing the place. Earl's boots by the door. Martin's dog-eared copy of All Quiet on the Western Front on the side table. A pot of soup simmering gently in the kitchen. "It's different," he said. "It's home," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured him some coffee, black, no sugar, the way he used to take it. He stared into the mug like it might offer answers. He took a sip and cleared his throat. "I wanted to talk," he said quietly. I waited. "I don't really know where to start." "How about with the truth?" I said, not unkindly. He winced. "I messed up. We messed up. Lisa and me." I didn't say anything. He rubbed his hands together. At first, it was just about space. Noise. The kids. Stress. You know. Then Lisa started getting ideas. I went along with it because it was easier than fighting. I told myself you didn't mind. That you were okay. You convinced yourself I belonged in the garage. He looked up sharply. "I didn't want that, Dad. But you let it happen." He didn't argue. He didn't need to. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "I think I started seeing you as a problem instead of a person. That's what Lisa did. And I followed her lead." Another pause. "I shouldn't have." I leaned back in my chair. My hands rested on the table, still rough with dirt from the garden. I studied him. My son. Graying at the temples. Worn down. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed to say it. I needed you to know I remember everything you did for me. And Mom. All of it. I haven't forgotten. I just buried it for a while." A memory flashed through my mind, David at 10 years old, standing at the edge of the lake, shivering in his wet clothes because he'd tried to rescue a bird caught in fishing line. He'd cried when it died in his hands. That boy had compassion. Maybe a piece of him was still in there. "I appreciate you saying it," I said finally. "But words don't patch holes in roofs." "I know. I won't be putting you back in the will." He nodded. "I figured. But I won't hold on to hate. That's your burden to carry, not mine." A long breath escaped him, maybe disappointment, maybe relief. He glanced toward the hallway. "Ellie's been drawing pictures of the house," he said. "Says it looks like a big hug now. I think she misses you." "I miss her too. I can bring her by sometime. If that's okay." I nodded. "Just her. Not Lisa." He smiled faintly. "Understood." He finished the coffee, stood up, and looked around again. "You turned it into something better than any of us deserved." "No," I said, standing too. "I turned it into what it was always meant to be." He walked to the door, hand resting on the knob. "I'll let you know if she wants to visit." "I'd like that." He stepped out onto the porch, but before he left, he turned back one last time. "I'm sorry, Dad." I nodded. "I know." And then he was gone. Just like that. I stood in the doorway a few seconds longer, feeling something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but a softening. a weight lifting just enough to let me breathe deeper. Later that evening, I sat with Earl and Martin over bowls of soup. I told them the truth, that David had visited, said his piece, and left with nothing but an apology. Earl grunted. Better than most sons. Martin nodded. That's a start. I didn't say it aloud, but I knew they were right. Not every wound needs to be reopened to be acknowledged. And not every apology needs to be accepted to have meaning. Have you ever had to choose dignity over family? Tell us in the comments below. The day we held the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the sun came out like it had been waiting for this very moment. It wasn't anything grand, just a few folding chairs set out on the lawn, some lemonade, and a banner made by one of the local elementary school classes that read, "Welcome home, heroes." Vanessa from the community center stood beside me as we watched neighbors trickle in, hands full of baked goods, folded towels, and warm smiles. Martin wore a pressed shirt. Earl even managed to shine his boots. The porch was full of people who had once been strangers, now connected by something stronger than blood, purpose. I stepped up to the makeshift podium, a repurposed music stand, and cleared my throat. I'm not much for speeches, I began, the crowd chuckling gently, but I'll try. I took a breath and looked out at the faces. Some old, some young, some I'd known for decades, some I'd only just met. All of them part of something now. This house was once just a home for a family of 3, I said. Then it became quiet. Then it became a battleground. But now it's something better. I turned to glance at the tulips blooming beneath the dogwood tree, Marjorie's tree. It's a place for healing. For rest. For remembering who we are, even when the world forgets. I paused and looked up at the banner. Marjorie's house. That's what we're calling it. A hush settled over the yard. She always said love lives in the little things, clean sheets, fresh biscuits, a porch light left on. She believed in making space for people who had nowhere else to go. And now, we're doing just that. In her name. In her spirit. Vanessa stepped up beside me, scissors in hand. Together, we cut the ribbon. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. It was full. Later that evening, I sat in my old rocking chair on the porch, watching the sun melt behind the trees. Earl sat beside me, humming something low and familiar. Inside, Martin was teaching one of the new residents how to make fried rice. The house buzzed softly, laughter, footsteps, the creak of furniture being used with love, not tension. I thought of David then, not with anger, but with a quiet acceptance. I hadn't heard from him again since his visit, but Ellie had sent me a new drawing. This one showed 4 stick figures, me, her, and 2 others she labeled friends. The house in the picture had a big heart drawn on the roof. I'd pinned it above the kitchen sink. I leaned back and looked up at the stars blinking into view. Can you see it, Marjorie? I whispered. Can you see what we built, what it became? And in the stillness that followed, I felt it again. Not the ache of loss. Not the sting of betrayal. But the warmth of purpose. This house, once heavy with silence, now sang with life. It echoed with soft footsteps of men finding rest. It smelled of fresh bread and floor polish and the distinct comfort of people trying again. It was full. Not of things. Not of entitlement. But of people who understood what it meant to be given a second chance. I thought back to that night in the garage, when I'd been told to sleep on cold concrete in the house I had bled to build. When my son stood silent and let his wife lock me out of my own past. And I thought of the night I signed the papers. Of the letter I left in the file box. Of the little girl who reminded me what hope looked like in crayon strokes. I had lost much. But I had reclaimed everything that mattered. I closed my eyes, the chair creaking beneath me. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a haven. A monument. A promise kept. Marjorie's house lived again. And this time, it would never be stolen, silenced, or sold away in the dark. This time, it would stand. For her. For them. For all of us. They told me to sleep in the garage, so I sold the house while they slept.